Hey, I'm Jenna Wolf, certified lactation counselor, parent coach, and extended breastfeeding mom of two. I fully understand the unique challenges of breastfeeding beyond the baby days, and I'm here to take your hand and support you along your journey. So toss that hair in a messy bun, grab a basket of laundry to fold, and let's get started. This is Start to Stop Toddler Breastfeeding.
Are you ready to wean? That is the question that we will be talking about today. And it might seem a little bit backwards because last week I answered the question, how do you begin weaning? But I did that on purpose. How do you begin weaning is the question that parents ask me the most when they first come to see me. And quickly, very shortly into the conversation, the question arises, actually, am I ready to wean? It is very rare, although it does happen, that I have a parent come to me that is 100% sure that they are going to wean and there is no ifs, ands, buts about it. And if that is you, you can probably go ahead and just turn this episode off and come and meet me next week when I talk about the actual process of weaning, like the actual how to. But today we're going to answer this question, are you ready to wean? So if there's any little bit inside of you that thinks, I don't know, is this the right time? Is my child really ready? Is this actually what I want? If you have any inkling around that, any little bit of you that might feel that way, then stick with me. We're going to have a conversation. You're going to feel a lot clearer by the end of this episode. And I'm going to leave you with some questions for deeper reflection, which I actually did last week as well. I ended the episode with some questions for reflection, and I had such beautiful feedback from you guys in my DMs on Instagram and in my emails. And I just love being a part of your story, and that you would feel so safe enough to be that vulnerable to share what came up for you. I am truly blown away by that. So I really just a big shout out to all of you listening, that you would be willing to take this journey of vulnerability and of being honest and of asking these tough questions and of doing the work to get deeper and to know what's actually going on so that you can truly give your child the best start that you've always wanted to give them, the best start that you started breastfeeding for in the first place. Yeah, that was just a little aside. But thank you for sending those in. It's really beautiful. I really appreciate it. And for those of you that didn't, I just thank you so much for even tuning in. It means so much to me. So let's start out this conversation by just addressing the elephant in the room. That is simply the word weaning. There is likely to be some emotional charge in that word for you. And if you have any questions about it at all, there's probably things coming up. Take a moment right now. Think of the word weaning in your mind and just check in with your body. What is coming up? It's okay if it's neutral, if there's nothing, but do you feel any tension, any heat or coldness, any tingling? What is your body telling you about that word? And check in with your mind. What thoughts are coming up? Check in with your feelings. Let's just hold those things in awareness. Just be aware that is there. That is information coming from your body and your mind and your emotions. And if we can be aware of it, then it's less likely to be unconsciously got a hold of the steering wheel here through this conversation, right? Those things can quickly become a lens that you're viewing this conversation through. And it would stop you from really being able to see what I'm sharing objectively, right? If you have one way of feeling about weaning or another. So just be aware, because there is a lot of emotions. It can be a really triggering topic, and it probably is if you felt drawn to this episode. So just be aware that's there and be kind to yourself. It makes sense that it's there. Okay, so you've done that. Now, before we can say, are you ready to wean? We really have to define what weaning is. If you were to Google right now, and I did, what is weaning? You're going to find a lot of statements that essentially say weaning is the introduction of solid foods to your child, right? Weaning is, your child eating solid foods, not eating breast milk, solid foods now. Here is the trouble. We perhaps could say that eating solid foods is fully weaned, but the process of moving from strictly breastfeeding all the way through to fully weaned is a long time. At what point does weaning begin? Does it begin when you first introduce solid foods? And if weaning begins when you first introduce solid foods, when does it end? If it ends when you're fully done breastfeeding, then if we look at, right, I've said it a million times, I could say it in my sleep. We're talking about the World Health Organization, the Canadian Pediatric Society, the AAP, the NHS, all of these different health organizations that recommend breastfeeding for 6 months exclusively, then the introduction of solid foods, and all the way to 24 months or 2 years and beyond. So just based on that, if you go through the minimum recommendations, then you're going to be, quote, weaning for 18 months. 18 months of weaning, right? You're starting with solid foods. And if you decide to finish at 2 years, or if finishing happens, I should say, at 2 years, then 18 months of weaning, right? So if you're saying, am I ready to wean? Chances are you already are in that process. We can also take a step back even further and ask yourself, like, when does that weaning begin? So we're looking there. So you can say the introduction of solid foods, but I'm going to even zoom out further back and give you an even bigger, broader timeline to take a look at here. So the World Health Organization, right, talks about exclusive breastfeeding. So even the word exclusive breastfeeding can be like a minefield, right? So many people have different ideas of what that actually means. Some mothers who are exclusively pumping and provide their baby only breast milk to consume consider themselves exclusively breastfed, or at least their baby is exclusively breastfed. And then there's those that wouldn't consider exclusive breastfeeding if their child has taken a bottle period. That's not exclusively breastfeeding, like only from the breast. And then you have everything in between, right? In order to avoid that confusion with the word exclusive breastfeeding, I'm going to talk about something called ecological breastfeeding. So ecological breastfeeding is when your child, or the child in this, conversation, only drinks breast milk from the tap and nothing else goes in their mouth. And breastfeeding happens by cue. So always responding to the child's needs and promptly when the child cues. So this means that the child is breastfed, quote, on demand, or their needs are being responded to extremely promptly. And they're always being met with the all-in-one parenting tool of breast milk and breastfeeding, the breast. So another partner or caregiver isn't like withholding the child from the parent, saying, oh, I'll soothe them while you do this thing. And I'm not talking about a couple of minutes. I'm talking about, like, we're going to hold off on breastfeeding, that it's important to create a gap or to create a schedule. So all of that would not fall under ecological breastfeeding. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not trying to create any morality around this. And that is why it's important that you hold your feelings and awareness, right? I'm not suggesting that ecological breastfeeding is the right way to do things. I'm simply giving this definition, and that was what would fall under ecological breastfeeding. So ecological breastfeeding is no pacifiers, no bottles, and the baby is also sleeping in sensory proximity with the parent, with the breastfeeding parent. So this doesn't necessarily mean that they're sharing the same surface to sleep on, that they're in the same surface, the same bed, but that the child is so close that they're sharing sensory information. So scent and even breath and heart rate and all of those things can be shared, so that they're so in tune that the parent will be responding to the earliest cues even over sleep. And ecological breastfeeding has very specific effects on both the baby and the mother, physiologically speaking. So there are certain hormones and everything that's happening in that time that can produce, it generally produces very well regulated breast milk. So we're saying the best case scenario where the mother's producing the perfect amount of milk for her and her baby. So not too much, not too little. It also has the benefits of, for example, the parent and the child's sleep the sleep cycles will link up. So that means that the child rouses at times when the parent is already naturally in a lighter state of sleep, which means that they will feel more rested, even if they wake up just as many times as someone else who isn't in that linked up sleep cycles. They're going to feel more rested because they're not getting roused out of that deep sleep. So the child's and parents' sleep cycles are linking up. So that's another benefit, or descriptive factor. I don't necessarily want to say benefit, but like it's just something that happens in ecological breastfeeding. Another thing would be lactation amenorrhea. So that is when there's no menstruation that happens and it's lactation induced. So this would be using, quote, breastfeeding as birth control. So this is not the same as exclusive breastfeeding, right? We're still talking no pacifier here. Babies feeding frequently overnight. Parents are like, parent and baby are very connected, sensory speaking, right? But in that state, as long as that's occurring, it is as likely to be effective as a contraceptive, ecological breastfeeding, as hormonal contraceptives. So there's all of these things at play, right? Here's the thing. As soon as the baby has a pacifier, as soon as the mother and baby are separated for, a decent amount of time, so like beyond when they would normally be, like separated essentially through a hunger cue, right? There's separation happening there. Or the baby's giving a bottle. There begins a change in the mother's hormonal system. I don't want to get too technical. I want to stay like general with these things so that you can really grab it. But essentially, there's this kind of cascade of hormonal shifts that begin to happen. And it truly is the beginning of the weaning process. So for some people, they never ecologically breastfed. That was really not something that ever happened. The baby was given a pacifier in the first few hours or first couple days even. So you could consider that's the beginning of the weaning process. That weaning was beginning to occur from that point. Now, again, weaning can continue to happen for a very long time, this weaning process, but it can happen from that point. So we have ecological breastfeeding at this one end of the spectrum, which would be like no weaning, no weaning happening. And then we move through to this fully weaned piece over on the far side, which is when there is no breast being used at all in any capacity or any breast-like equivalent, right? No formula, no bottle, nothing. So we have ecological breastfeeding, breast milk. The breast is the all-in-one parenting tool. No other parenting tool is being used. And then we have the far side where breast is completely out of the equation. Okay? A lot of times you can consider, okay, I want to say this clearly. Okay, ecological breastfeeding is going to come to an end. The weaning process will begin. And most parents actually, they might stress about when to introduce solid foods for whatever reason, but they're not stressing about it because breastfeeding is, quote, coming to an end in most cases. They're aware that breastfeeding is going to continue on after solid food starts. And yet we're still in this mindset of like, am I ready to wean? Am I ready to begin weaning? Well, you already have begun weaning. If your child's eating solid foods, even before that, if your child's taking a pacifier or a bottle, you can consider that weaning process as the little first domino has fallen, right? It's going to take a long time. You could keep sticking dominoes out, okay? But it's started. So in that same way, the full coming to an end is going to happen. You start out with this ecological breastfeeding, which not everybody does or did, but it would be in the breastfeeding timeline. Then you have this kind of possible introduction of a pacifier or a bottle or a schedule that would all be that first little tick of the domino, that starts the cascade. Then you have the introduction of solid foods. But even through that, breast milk continues to provide support. So solid foods can be introduced at about 6 months. Generally speaking, the child has to have lost their tongue thrust reflex. So that's when essentially something touches their tongue and they push it out with their tongue. And this is a very protective reflex for babies to have because it stops them from choking. If something unexpected enters their mouth, they push it out, or if they're trying to put things into their mouth, they're not going to choke on it. So that begins to disappear around 6 months, sometimes a little earlier, sometimes a little later. And then they would also need to, what are the other signs? They would need to actually be interested in food, right? Some babies just aren't quite interested in foods at 6 months. It might happen closer to 7 months or maybe even 8 months, but generally speaking, it's around 6 months. Then they need to be able to sit unsupported, and that's to have enough trunk control in their, that midline strength in order to not choke or to be able to gag and move the food out without a lot of support on their own, essentially, right? So we have that needs to happen, and then the solid foods becomes introduced. And then after that, the solid food introduction is, you start with one one meal a day, right? Or maybe one meal every other day. You just start out with that. And then you're slowly increasing the amount of meals so that ideally by 12 months, your child is having about 3 meals a day and 2 snacks. It's a general recommendation, right? And in that time, from the time that solid food starts to that 12-month-ish mark, you're intentional about providing a breast milk or offering breast milk about 30 to 15 minutes before each serving of solid food so that breastfeeding continues to be the primary source of nutrition or, a bottle or whatever, but it continues to be the primary source of nutrition so that they're not like completely starving every time they sit down to eat solid foods. That breast milk is still being offered, right? It's at that time when they might be struggling to, you know, we know that babies don't really struggle to ask for breast milk. But if you're only feeding them solid foods and they may not, and they don't have an opportunity to breastfeed, then they may be missing out on important nutrients through that they would only get through the breast milk. And so it's important that you do that. And then you can continue to give breast milk for as long as, happens after that. And we're going to get into what that end looks like. I'm getting there. I'm getting there, folks. But it continues to provide, the breast milk itself continues to provide really important nutrients for the child. The physical act of breastfeeding is an important way for children's nervous systems to regulate. And a lot of times parents can be concerned that they aren't giving their child enough opportunities to explore other coping mechanisms or strategies, but that's not true. Breastfeeding itself supports the child's brain to wire to be able to calm. So it doesn't mean that like you're not withholding anything from your child by offering them breast milk every time that they get upset. You're not saying, you're not giving them no other tools, right? Like it's actually most important that their body is learning how to calm down. The method of it isn't as important. It's more important that they are being calmed. But anyways, I digress. Regardless, breastfeeding continues to provide important, it continues to be important after the second year of life, through the second year of life and beyond. And it continues to be important for mothers too. It continues to have long-term health benefits as long as it's being given. You continue to benefit in the now and in the long term when it comes to things like, your risk of breast cancer and diabetes and other heart disease, other things. It's important. No matter how long it's being given, it's important for immunological support, lots of things. What does the very end look like? A lot of times we have this idea of it being mother-led or child-led. So there's mother-led, mothers just decide to stop, or there's child-led, child just decides to stop. I think that's really a false dichotomy. I really press against that idea, and I don't think it serves us at all. Even if we look at, I just think that it's impossible to tease out who really does initiate. So we can look at this still face experiment, which is a psychology experiment that was done in the 1970s originally. It's been redone many times, but where babies and mothers were essentially like the baby was in a little high chair and they had some little toys, or they were sitting down, and the mother and baby were interacting with each other. So like making silly faces and just playing, right? And in the still face experiment, the mother would just be cued or told to make her face go still. And then the researchers would watch the infant's reactions to the mother's face and how they would try to engage the mother again. And then, it's this very interesting experiment. What I find most interesting about it for this purpose is the fact that when the baby and the mother were interacting, it seems there's this dance of interaction that happens between the two. So like baby makes a face and mother makes a face, or baby laughs, and it goes back and forth. But it was impossible at times for the researchers to know who initiated the interaction. That the mother and the child were so in sync that it was very difficult to know who initiated this particular type of play. And I think that that's what ends up happening in the weaning journey. It's actually very difficult. It's impossible to tease out. Would the mother's interactions here have changed the child's interactions there? Would the child's interactions here have influenced the mother's interactions? You cannot do it. And in fact, when the parent was to go completely still face to stop the interactions with the child's stress went through the roof. So if we're to hand the child all of the control, if you were truly to do this, I don't actually think that this is what people are doing when they say that they've practiced child-led weaning or that their child self-weaned. I don't think that this is true at all. But this is what we think about. Before we've gotten there, this is what we think is going to happen, is that we somehow drop all of our needs. We somehow just become so neutral that our child's needs just take over and run the show. But that would be very harmful to your child. Simply put, you're in an attachment relationship, and there is meant to be a dance between you. There always has been, and there always will be, and you cannot stop that from being the case. Your child is unconsciously and consciously, but often unconsciously, responding to every little minute cue that you're giving them. And you are doing the same to them. So you cannot say that this was mother-led and this was child-led. What does that ending really end up looking like? Yes. Sometimes the mothers are like, we're done. But that's when if the child wasn't in a position to really be ready for that, then there's going to be pushback. It's not going to happen. There's going to be a lot of pushback. It's going to be really difficult. And that's okay. That's the case. But again, this doesn't mean that the child wasn't necessarily ready to stop having breast milk, but it means that breast milk was still the way that they need to have their needs met right now. And there needs to be support for those underlying needs. And by the same token, so you can so the child will, of course, you could just physically stop and be like, oh, we're done. This is never happening again. But of course, that would be there would be detriment to your relationship and to the child. So people they don't really do that, cut them off. And if you would do that, you're probably not listening to this podcast, right? I get you. So the child is continuing to breastfeed, which means you are being child-led because you're continuing to breastfeed. You're meeting your child's needs with breast milk. So when you come to me and I support you to find other ways to meet your child's needs, and we can make a pathway forward that works really beautiful for you. We do that in Own Your Breastfeeding Story, that it looks different. But again, that's meeting your child's needs. So it still is child-led weaning and it still is mother-led weaning, right? Both of your needs are being met in that process. And then we have this kind of alternative view where moms aren't really making much intentional changes and the child just stops asking for breast milk, right? And so this can happen at any stage. And sometimes if this happens, generally speaking, if this happens before the age of 2, you can continue to offer and your child will pick it back up again. And a lot of times, because of the recommendations that are given, whether that's at 4 months or 10 months or 18 months, there are ways to bring your child back to the breast. And some parents, it's just important to continue to going until the age of 2. And so I can even support you with that too. We can do that. In a lot of cases, the child will come back to the breast. Not always though. But at a certain point, right, the child's that tool isn't going to work anymore. The child will have outgrown the need and the child will have outgrown that tool will the child will have outgrown that tool. It's just not going to meet the needs the same way anymore. They're going to have outgrown the nutritional needs for breast milk and they're going to have outgrown the need for that tool. So that happens and that's going to happen regardless of the stage that you're at right now. Eventually it will happen. It really doesn't become, are you ready to wean? The question becomes, what is the source of my discomfort? What is the source of my discomfort, right? Because the weaning, it either would be happening, you either would have done it, it would have happened, or you would be able to just keep going without feeling this discomfort inside. When I said the word weaning and stuff came up. So it's the question that you need to ask yourself is, what is the source of my discomfort? And even if it feels uncomfortable or you don't really believe me, I want you to add on to that question. If breastfeeding isn't the source of my discomfort, then what is? I know it can feel like breastfeeding is the thing that is causing all of your pain and causing you to be waking up at night and causing you to be so stressed out. But breastfeeding itself, the reason why we feel like it's breastfeeding is because of our cultural lens that we have. Because in other cultures, they don't feel that way. And not everyone experiences those issues who's breastfeeding. And I see it. I see it as the one that is supporting moms at all these stages and the ones who feel like every breastfeeding mom must go through this. This is just the normal thing to go through. You just hit this stage and then you feel this way, so you wean. But that's just not the case. And of course, if you are fully committed to being done, then that's cool. You do you 100%. I will support you completely along that way. I think that that's incredible that you feel so clear. But if there is discomfort inside, I can guarantee you that the source of discomfort is not actually from breastfeeding. So then the question becomes, after you identify what that source of discomfort is how do you manage that discomfort? So I know last week I gave a bunch of different whys. We talked about the why for weaning, right? And so this could really become another way of viewing that, of the why for weaning. But I talked about bunch of different examples, and I even gave some that are like almost non-negotiable ways for whys for weaning, but I even want to revisit that a little bit. So I'm going to talk about a really big one that feels like really obvious what the choice should be or, is for everyone. But believe me, I've seen people choose things that I wouldn't and that a lot of other people wouldn't. So let's talk about a cancer diagnosis. Cancer is the source of your discomfort in this scenario. Cancer would be the source of the discomfort. It's not breastfeeding. Breastfeeding's not the problem. Cancer is. So the question becomes how, after you identify it, that's one's very obvious, obviously, but then how do you manage that discomfort? How do you manage the cancer? So some people would choose to manage it through things like diet and, alternative therapies, which may or may not be compatible with breastfeeding. Sometimes they would choose to manage the cancer by simply accepting it and not having treatment. I'm not suggesting that that's like moral or immoral, but that path of managing would likely actually be compatible with breastfeeding. Of course, there would also be the option for managing it with chemotherapy, which isn't compatible with breastfeeding. So it's actually not about the breastfeeding. It's not like I have cancer, so I have to wean. It's about identifying your discomfort, identifying the ways of managing it, and then identifying whether or not that management option is compatible with breastfeeding. That would be that kind of option. But let's talk about something that's far less intense and far less obvious. Still, many people would make choices that I wouldn't, or that maybe you wouldn't. And so let's just be open to those possibilities here. So let's talk about pressure from family to wean. So you have family or friends, or you're in a culture, or you're in an environment. I'm not necessarily talking about society at large, but like the area that you're in, your cultural environment, maybe work or whatever, school, daycare, there's pressure to wean. It's just not compatible. It doesn't feel compatible with breastfeeding. So you can look at what is the source of the discomfort here. So the source of discomfort isn't breastfeeding. That's not the problem. Breastfeeding isn't the problem. The problem is really the dysfunction with the family, the dysfunctional environment, people who think that they have any right to say what you do with your body. That would be the people where that discomfort really is coming from. And then you could even say to that perhaps the source of discomfort is actually, it's not necessarily the words of the other people, but the way that you feel about yourself and whether or not, like, how you want to manage that. You could manage the discomfort by moving, by picking a different job, by going no contact with the family, setting boundaries with the family, setting boundaries with your employer or with your coworkers. Or you could wean so that the topic doesn't come up anymore, right? So again, this becomes, are you ready to wean? The question isn't really about, are you ready to wean? The question becomes, what is the source of your discomfort and how are you choosing to manage it? So there's benefits and drawbacks from each of those options. And I know this is similar to the journal prompts that I gave last week, but I feel like this is even more pointed and with this greater knowledge and insight into what weaning really is and how weaning actually like occurs, although I will move into that next week. Because if you decide, yep, weaning is what I need to do, want to do, then let's do that. We'll talk about that next week. But if you're not ready there, then you need to dig deeper into this. What is the source of your discomfort? And there's no right or wrong. And I'm not judging you for any of your choices. And once you have truly identified the source of your discomfort and you've decided how you or which way you want to manage it, we're going to talk about however you manage it in the next session, what that actually looks like to manage it, because that might sound a little bit theoretical at this point. But there's lots of options, lots and lots of options available to you. And some of it does mean finishing completely, and some of it doesn't. And that is your choice ultimately. And if you're ready or not is really about sitting with that. It's really about working through that, understanding what that source of discomfort really is. That is truly how you know if you are ready to wean or not. identifying that source of discomfort, because from that source of discomfort, it will become clear to you which pathway is right for you and your family. And you may need some support with that. I gotcha. And hopefully I can offer some of that next week too. But once you identify that source of discomfort, it will become much more clear to you. And it can be difficult to identify that source of discomfort. That's just a fact. But that's the work. And the beautiful thing is that doing that work will benefit your relationship with yourself, getting really clear on that, but it will benefit your relationship with your child far and above breastfeeding and for the long term. This is how I can say that breastfeeding and the weaning experience can be the most bonding and beautiful part of your breastfeeding journey and can set you up for long-term success in parenting. Okay, that's enough for me this week. And if you want some support with how to say no to the feed while still saying yes to the need, so if you're like, I just need a little bit of help working through some of this, I need a little bit of support while I'm figuring out what the source of my discomfort is, head on over to ownyourparentingstory.com/guide. And you will get it's literally like a 16-page PDF, I think, but I have a cheat sheet that is there for you too. It's printable. I tried to keep it as super, super easy as possible so that you can just download it and print it out and be ready to go, have it at your fingertips, or you can save it as your lock screen on your phone to just have it when you need it for how to say no to the feed while still saying yes to the need. I will catch you next week where we're going to talk about how to actually stop breastfeeding.
If you loved this episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button so that you don't miss any episodes in the future. Also, check out my breastfeeding toddler communication guide and cheat sheet to learn how to say no to the feed while still saying yes to the need at www.ownyourparentingstory.com/guide. And that concludes another episode of Start to Stop Toddler Breastfeeding. The theme song is Little Balloon by Jenny and Tyler, and it has been a pleasure to share this time with you. I'll catch you in the next episode.